Back in June of 2018, Brianna Gray of The Intercept wrote this story. Fetishizing identity politics could cost Democrats in 2020. And boy, was she right, because it's not even been a year, and we are already seeing the ramifications of the embracing of some of these, in my opinion, stupidest ideas and dogmatic religious behavior that is going to be the end, in my opinion, again, for the Democrats. Now, while I'll read just the first paragraph here. The 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign terraformed the landscape of political possibility. Socialist is no longer a slur. Medicare for all is a litmus test for 2020 hopefuls. And Americans are no longer so inured to the influence of money in politics. To millions on the left, the then relatively unknown Vermont senator's unexpected surge in the 2016 Democratic primary and consistently strong approval ratings demonstrate that electoral victory in 2020 requires adopting much of his platform and approach to politics. This means, among other things, making economic inequality central to any prospective presidential agenda. I agree. Economic inequality is an issue. Because you see these people at these colleges, like the college scandal where the rich people cheated to get on sports teams, and typically it's what they do. There is a class barrier. I have no problem recognizing the advantages that rich people have that are plainly obvious that poor people don't have. However, what the identitarians are trying to do is they're trying to claim that someone like Serena Williams, yes, this happened, who is worth millions of dollars and one of the most powerful people on the planet, is underprivileged or marginalized. I'm sorry. There may be some social circumstances where she does face, sexism and racism and all that, but I'm sorry, listen. The millions of dollars you have offsets that, okay? So class is a real, barrier. But I think that, we've actually done some pretty great things as in our country of fixing these problems. A poor person today has a refrigerator and air conditioning. Didn't have that 100 years ago, right? So things have gotten better for everybody. The identitarians are trying to claim that race is more important in terms of your access than the money you have. That is plainly false. And thus, they're going to reap the ramifications of their own embracing of identity politics, including Mr. Bernie Sanders. Interestingly, they love to claim that Bernie did all these great things while they omit what Bernie Sanders also did. Played into the wage gap myth and made comments about white people not knowing what it's like to be poor, which we'll get to in a second. But let's move into the present. Maybe we'll come back to this and take a look at some of the ideas they had, but let's move into the present. Jill Filipovich, I don't know who that is. She's a writer, lawyer, author of The H-Spot, The Feminist Pursuit of Happiness. Now, we have this tweet from Stedman, which is a quote. People, I don't know why they do this. Quote. Pete Buttigieg said, "This is just a preliminary analysis, but our team's initial report shows we raised over $7 million in Q1 of this year. You, are outperforming expectations at every turn. I'll have a more complete analysis later, but until then, a big thank you to all." And there's a little more, but that's fine. Stedman said, "Mayor Pete may outraise Senator Warren." Well, in response to learning that the woman who's running is not going to raise as much money as the white man, Jill Filipovich says, "Fascinating and predictable to see Democratic donors throwing their money behind the white male candidates, even those who are far less experienced and qualified than several of the women." Yes, Pete Buttigieg, I actually think it's fair to say in many capacities is less experienced than Elizabeth Warren, who's on the national stage. And Pete Buttigieg is a local mayor, a small town mayor. It's not small town, but he's South Bend mayor. But he does have military experience, and he did help transform the economy in his town. I don't like most of his policies. I think they come straight out of a Democrat playbook, and I'm not sure he's actually thought of them himself. But now we can see Pete Buttigieg, who is openly gay and would be the first major contender who is LGBT identified in a major political party. Not good enough. He's just a white man. Congratulations. And you know who I blame for this? Not entirely, but I do blame Bernie Sanders, and there's a reason why I'm not as big of... I like Tulsi Gabbard more than Bernie now. Tulsi has rejected identity politics. Don't take my word for it. She did an interview with Michael Tracy, who is a progressive journalist, where she said, it is bad, it is divisive, we can't, have these things, and just like, bravo. I think there's some policies that I think she's wrong on. But on the issue of war and then on the issue of identity politics, I'm like, bingo, there you go. Staunchly anti-war, anti-intervention, and full disclosure, I did support her for this, with a donation, just so you guys know it's clear as I give you my opinion. But Bernie has played the game, and we'll get to Bernie. Well, Glenn Greenwald made a rather strange statement, two-parter. The first being good, and the second being downright confusing. Glenn Greenwald responded to Filopovic, and it's this funny string of quoting, of course. He said, "Note how the first ever openly LGBT credible candidate for president is dismissed as nothing more than a white male. The historic nature of his candidacy crassly erased and him reduced to his sex and race as though being LGBT isn't any kind of notable barrier or marginalization." Now, I think Glenn is slightly miffed by this because he is also openly gay. And so here he sees someone that's actually overcoming this marginalization being reduced to his race. But then it gets weird because Glenn then goes on a tweet. "This is the pathology that causes centrist Democrats to erase what would be the extraordinary and historic nature of a Sanders presidency, the first ever Jew to occupy the Oval Office in a country with a long history of anti-Semitism. They wield these concepts so crassly and cynically. Yes, oh, it was the centrist Democrats embracing this. Excuse me, what? No, the people who are in Congress right now on the Democratic side who embrace identitarianism are the socialist candidates." But I guess Glenn, who is more of the Bernie type, wants these more left-wing policy positions and not the identitarianism. And I can agree with that to a certain extent. Unfortunately, it's the far left embracing identitarianism. Not Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi, who's come out against the Green New Deal, which was loaded with identitarianism, or who rejected the Russiagate tribalist nonsense. But now we get to Mr. Sanders. Here's PolitiFact, March 7th, 2016. "Bernie Sanders was wrong to say, when you're white, you don't know what it's like to be poor." So I'm sorry, who is embracing identity politics? Because even PolitiFact said false. Yes, clearly, of course, white people know what it's like to be poor. It doesn't matter what your race is. You can have no money. How many? You ever see go to Chicago and walk downtown? You'll see tons of poor white people. During the Democratic debate in economically distressed and racially diverse Flint, CNN's Don Lemon asked both Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders the same question. In a speech about policing, Lemon said, the FBI Director James Comey borrowed a phrase saying everyone is a little bit racist. What racial blind spot do you have? When it was Sanders' turn to answer, he began by talking about several specific examples of racial discrimination. He then drew a contrast with what whites experience, saying, "When you're white, you don't know what it's like to be living in a ghetto. You don't know what it's like to be poor. You don't know what it's like to be hassled when you walk down the street or you get dragged out of a car," Sanders said. Several readers asked us to take a closer look at Sanders' comment that when you're white, you don't know what it's like to be poor. Well, here we go. So PolitiFact pulled up the numbers. In fact, white people are the majority of people in poverty. Now, it is also factually accurate to say that there is a disproportionate amount of people of other ethnic backgrounds and races that are in poverty. So there are, African Americans make up around 13% of the population, but they have half as many poor people in poverty than around half, a little bit more than half than white people do. So it is disproportionate. I think that's fair to point out. But it's also important to point out that most people who are poor are white. So Bernie decided to play the game of identity politics. He also talked about the gender wage gap, which is just absolutely not true. It is misleading to take all jobs of all people and compare them based on gender, because the best way I've heard it explained is you're comparing the salary of the CEO of Ralph Lauren to a cashier in his store. Or a better example would be it's comparing the salaries of petroleum engineers to school teachers. It doesn't make sense. That's why the aggregate numbers don't make sense. The issue there is cultural, having to do with what jobs people are choosing, and maybe society constructs, that's fine, but Bernie played the game. They say Sanders was certainly wrong to suggest that whites haven't experienced poverty. What? I grew up on the south side of Chicago, okay? In a mostly mixed race neighborhood. I can assure you there were a bunch of slack-jawed yokel white people with missing teeth who were poor. And one dude I knew downtown was addicted to crack, and he made like $20 a day sleeping on the ground, panhandling, and then he would go buy drugs with it. Yes, I think most of us have seen there are poor white people. In fact, they voted for Donald Trump. And I think what Bernie did here is he really hurt the Democrats. This was a kick in the face when I heard him say this. And I'm not someone who has ever really identified with like whiteness or anything like that. although I think most people probably haven't. But I grew up in a mixed race neighborhood, in a mixed race family, to say it for the 15th billionth time for all those who know me. But I didn't grow up in this culture where I was actually concerned about who was like the race of people who were poor. It was like we were all poor. And there was an Asian dude, a Latino dude, a black dude, a dude from Poland, and we were all poor. And that was life. Bernie came up and said this, and to me that was really offensive because it speaks to my community. The people I knew who were suffering and struggling were just told they had no idea what they were talking about. And here I am, their neighbor, saying, no. These are good people. And I experienced this alongside them. We were brothers and sisters in arms in arms during this poverty. When I saw these dudes doing drugs, overdosing, dying, when a girl in my neighborhood that I used to hang out with overdosed, I knew exactly what it meant when my friends who were white were poor. And Bernie said this, and he played the game. It is the far left, not the centrists. It's really, really strange to me that Glenn Greenwald thinks that's the case. It's just not true. Now, don't get me wrong. There are people like Gillibrand who has openly embraced identitarianism. And that's terrifying, I guess, because she's really mainstream. And, so let's take a look at one of the responses just real quick. Jamenta says, I don't really care what their background is, what sex they are, or what their faith or non-faith is. What are their policies? Are they intelligent and capable to fulfill the responsibilities in office? I am so very sick of identity politics. Bravo. Me too, man. I completely agree. I would absolutely love to have a debate. Well, not a debate. I'm not a debater. I don't enter conversations trying to win, thinking my idea is the right idea. I want to have a conversation. I want to learn. And I want to share my ideas. I'd love to have a conversation about minimum wages, effective solutions. And that's why Andrew Yang has been really impressive to me. In full disclosure, I supported him too. Because I've heard his discussions about some of these issues, and it sounds like he takes a nuanced approach. He's actually come out and said he's not in favor of a minimum wage. And I'm like, whoa, that's weird. He's a Democrat. And I'm sorry, the $15. He said that it doesn't necessarily make sense because that would expedite automation. So no. And I was thinking about policy and why people are like, I'm a progressive because I believe X, and I'm this because I believe this. And I'm just like, wait, it doesn't matter what you think is the right answer. It matters that we sit down and discuss the effective solution. And I don't know what that solution is, so I don't know what that makes me, But, well, I guess I'll say one thing's for sure. Identity politics it's backfiring hard on the Democrats. Glenn Greenwald's wrong. I'm just going to say he's wrong. There certainly are some centrist types who embrace this, neoliberal social justice types who are mainstream, pro-corporate, really weird position to be in, rather fascistic if you ask me. But Ocasio-Cortez loaded up identitarianism in the Green New Deal. So I'm like, I like to ask Glenn, what's your position on that? Seriously, page 2 of the Green New Deal talked about racial equity and like fixing the disparity between white and black wealth and stuff like that. And I can recognize, sure, we want to mend communities and solve these problems, but what's your proposal? Taxing white people? Like, seriously, I don't know what you think you're going to be able to do. So anyway, I'll leave it there. But suffice it to say, the prediction made by The Intercept, I believe it's fair to point out, is coming true. Pete Buttigieg, he's the main focus. He's just another white man. And so is Bernie, and so is Biden. You reap what you sow. I'll leave it there. Stick around. I got another video coming up on my main channel, youtube.com/Timcast. It is a different channel from this one. Don't ask me why YouTube did that. That'll be at 4 p.m. I'll see you then.